obesity. From the marketing of this event, I used some statistics coming out of the CDD that shows that 1 of every 3 Americans is overweight, and which about 100 million, a little bit above that. And about 10% of those who are overweight, they are morbidly obese. That's over 10 million people. And in dealing with morbid obesity, and for the most part, drug-based approaches haven't generated results. There aren't any actually that are effective. And historically, either surgery or device-based approaches have been the preferred way of dealing with morbid obesity. And since the problem is on the rise, and it costs the country in direct cost about $75 billion. So if you calculate the indirect cost of that, hours lost work and accidents on the freeway, things like that, in addition to the complications that obesity leads to in terms of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and so on, the cost to the healthcare system, of course, is enormous. So that's creating a big opportunity, particularly in the current climate, where there's an emphasis on cutting the cost of and improving the efficiency of the healthcare system. And this opportunity is making venture capitalists and entrepreneurs see the color green, particularly in the device space targeting obesity. And Bill, a couple of days ago when we had a conference call to discuss the subject matter, mentioned that there are about 70 venture-backed companies in the United States that are working on some kind of device approach in the area of obesity. That's a lot of companies, and obviously many of them are not going to make it, but that shows you the amount of interest in that space on the part of venture capitalists and other investors. And a number of these companies, as you've heard here, Goleta has a new company that is very well venture funded, and they have money from Allergan, Aberdare, and one of my favorite venture capital firms, Onset Medical. And there's another company in Carpinteria called Valentex, which also raised a lot of venture capital money. And in Orange County, our star is Reshape Medical. So we decided to shed light on their approaches. And they just started clinical trials with their balloon, and it's a device that gets inserted inside the stomach and gives you a sense of fullness, and it reduces your calorie intake, and over a period of time, it induces weight loss. And company president, Mr. Bill Murray, is going to give an overview of the company and the technology, and Bill has over 20 years of experience in the device space, including a career with Medtronic, and then he got bitten by the entrepreneurial bug and decided to do Reshape Medical, which is also very well funded from venture sources. It is based in San Clemente, and as I mentioned, they started clinical studies of their balloon. And with no further ado, I would like to invite him to come to the podium to give his overview. And after his overview, we're going to invite our panelists to come to the table, and then we're going to start an interesting discussion about the implications of these technologies from reimbursement and regulatory hurdles, all the way to market acceptance. We're not going to use the panel discussion as some sort of a test of whether Reshape Medical's approach would work or not. We're using Reshape Medical as a case study that opens up a large number of issues when it comes to device-based approaches to obesity. With that, Bill?
As Ahmed said, I'm Bill Murray. I've been in the medical device industry for about 25 years. 18 of those years were with Medtronic. I ended up running the pacemaker business for Medtronic before it became cardiac rhythm management. This is my first startup company, and as I tell people, and since my chairman of the board here is here, I will make sure that I'm very positive on Reshape, but I should have gone to a startup 10 years ago. I just love what I'm doing. It's very empowering, and it's very dynamic every day. So a little bit more about Reshape Medical. Let's see if this works here. Just briefly, the company was formed in 2005 by an incubator and Intersect Partners. George Wallace, who has been a very prolific innovator in this area, entrepreneur, started the company with Dr. Andy Craig, who is an interventional radiologist out of Minnesota. And they looked at the space of obesity, as Ahmed said, and recognized that there's still a significant unmet need in the obesity space. And so looked at the options and opportunities and decided that they had some ideas on how to approach obesity in a somewhat different way. So the company is venture capital based. We've raised in total $28 million so far. In the last round, U.S. Venture Partners came in as the most recent investor. We also have SV Life Sciences and New Leaf Venture Partners. So very happy with the profile of investment group we have in the company right now. Right now we're about 15 employees, and we are growing, although in a very cautious, measured way. In terms of the company right now, we have over 100 clinical cases outside the U.S., and we started our pivotal U.S. trial last month in the U.S. And I'll just say a few very brief things. Coming from the medical device industry, clinical enrollment is one of the things that most startup companies have a huge challenge with. It's a very different situation with obesity. The demand and the patient, if you will, push versus having to pull and recruit patients. It's a much different environment, and it's why there's just a huge unmet need in this area. So I'm going to just do a little overview on obesity and the market. Obviously, obesity is in the news a lot, but there are some incredible statistics that are quite sobering relative to the U.S. So just a brief kind of definition of terms for those that maybe aren't as close to it. So BMI, body mass index, is what is normally used for describing your profile. And so essentially 18.5 to 25 is the normal range for adults. You're overweight if you're between 25 and 30, and then you start to be classified as obese at BMI 30 to 35. Class 2 obesity is 35 to 40, and Class 3 is 40 and above. And so, oftentimes, Class 3 obesity is also called morbid obesity. And BMI is your weight in kilograms divided by your height in meters squared. Or in the English system, there's a conversion factor, but basically it's your weight divided by your height squared. This is some data from the CDC. It's on their website. This is from 1990, so 20 years ago. And this it's from the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System. And what they're looking at is anybody that's with a BMI greater than 30. So roughly, to kind of put that in context, if you're a 5'4" person, that means you're 30 pounds overweight. So back in 1990, no states had greater than 15% of their population that was more than 30 pounds overweight. Let's keep that in mind. So if you're politically oriented, you'd say that at this point in time it was very much a democratic country. Now you come and you start looking, this is 5 years later in 1995. The dark blue is 15 to 19%. At this point in time now, over half of the states have their population that's more than 15% overweight. So in 5 years, just a dramatic shift in obesity in this country is unbelievable. So let's keep going. So now we're sitting here 5 years later. This is 2000. So I mean, this is clearly an epidemic. So now greater than 20% of the population, almost half of the states have now progressed to a point where 20% of their population is considered clinically obese. 2005, it even continues forward. So now a third of the states have greater than 25% of their population, more than 30% or 25% overweight, and 3 states now have more than 30% of their population overweight. So it's just unbelievable. It really is quite sad, frankly. And the most recent data they have is from 2008, and at this point in time, 2/3 of the states have greater than 25% of their population obese. It is an epidemic in this country that is going to cause a train wreck in terms of challenges to our healthcare system, our economic systems. So this clearly has to be dealt with as a society. It clearly has to be dealt with.